What's going on YouTube? Welcome to this presentation on creating Uber jars. This is a follow-up on a previous presentation I did on how to use third-party libraries or jars. So if you have not seen that, I recommend you check that out first. I will leave a link in the video description. So let's review what we had in the previous presentation. So we had a main.java that simply printed out a capitalized version of a word using this word utils from Apache Commons. So let's go ahead and run it. So we would run it with java-cp for class path, and we'd say lib demo jar and lib commons, and we would say run the demo.main class. And that worked. But a question is, what happens if I don't want to always specify this? Can't I include one jar with all these dependencies and run it? What if there are hundreds? It would be very tedious to write this all the time. So there's a couple of ways you can approach this. And there's basically two ways to solve this problem. There's this idea of shading and unshading jars, but I like to think of it as concatenating jars, concat, and there's another idea of a jar within jars, so basically a jar of jars concept. We're going to take a look at both of those in this presentation. So let's first look at the concat example. So first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to recompile the code and make a new demo jar, but give it a main class attribute. So let's go ahead and remove our demo jar and quickly create it again. So create a file called demo.jar, and I'm going to just give it a main class here, --main-class demo.main, and get the contents from the classes directory. There you go. We can run it the same way we did previously, just to make sure all is good. There you go, works fine. So now I'm going to go ahead and make an output directory. So let me go cd into that output directory, and then I'm going to extract the contents of my demo jar into this directory. So I'm going to extract the file that's in my lib demo here, and I'm going to do the same but for my Apache Commons. So now in this directory I have all the information from both jars. So I have my demo, which I created, and this org Apache, if we go through it, which is my dependency. And this is all in one directory. So if I go out of here and I jar this entire thing up, I can say jar create file. Let's call it uber.jar. And I can specify a main class in here actually. Main-class demo.main, and get the contents on my output. And now once I have this jar, I can simply run it with java-jar libuber.jar, and that works fine. But there's a pros and cons of going about it this way. One pro is it's relatively simple to do. You're basically just extracting jars into a directory and jarring that up. But one of the downsides is, what if there's name clashes between jars, or there's resources that have the same names? What happens? And unfortunately, this way of solving it won't work unless you get into the concept of shading jars, which is renaming packages and so forth. But we won't get to this in this presentation. So let's head on over to the next approach, which is a jar of jars. So how does that work? Well, basically what you'd have is one jar, let's call it uber.jar, which would inside contain my demo.jar and commons.jars. And when I run it, I will just run my uber jar. So Java by default doesn't look inside the class path or inside jars for other jars. So how can we make this work? Well, what we'd have to do is we'd have to specify custom class loaders that says when you run me or my jar, I will look for a main directory with a jar and assume that this class has your main class to run. And then I will also look in the lib directory for any dependencies. And I'll basically overwrite this class loading. So the benefit here is you don't need to change these jars in any way, in theory at least. And you can just run it. Now the drawback is that maybe if there's a bug in how you're loading the classes, that will be very difficult to find as you're no longer using the default class loader. Alright, so to do this I'm going to download one library called OneJar, which I will again I'll put the link in the video description, and let's save it to the libboot.jar. So this OneJar basically has the concept that we spoke about, these class loaders, and we'll take a look at that in just a moment. So let's go ahead and make a boot directory. I'm going to go inside the boot directory and let's extract that boot jar. So I'm going to say jar extract file from the libboot jar. So let's examine what's in this directory. So first of all, we don't need this source directory, so I'm going to get rid of it. And if we do a tree structure, you can see there's a couple of classes here. That is basically boot, handler, jar class loader, which is pretty much this section here. It's classes that will know how to load jars inside of jars. So now we're going to go ahead and create these main and lib directories. So let's say make dir main and lib and copy over our code. So I'm going to say copy from my lib demo to my main directory here, and similarly do it for the commons jar, lib commons lib. So let's go on out of here. I'm going to go ahead and jar the entire boot up. So I'm going to say jar create a file lib uber dash boot.jar to be distinct. I'm going to give it pointed to a manifest attribute, which I'll talk about in just a second, in boot.manifest.mf, and get the contents from the boot directory. Alright, so what is this boot manifest? Well, if we take a look at it, what it tells us here is that the main class, when we run it, will be com Symantuf's OneJar boot, which basically means that when you run the program, use this one boot, which is going to do this custom class loading, and that one will know to look for a main directory with our demo.jar and a lib, and in the lib directory for any dependencies. So let's go ahead and run it. So I'm going to say java-jar lib uber-bootjar. And of course, there had to be errors. So reading around on the net, most people did not run into such errors. As you see now, things just worked. But as fate would have it, my example did not work. And after some, if you will say, treacherous debugging, I figured out that the Apache Commons manifest file and the OneJar library we're using did not quite see eye to eye. So once I removed it, things worked just fine. So how did I remove it? Well, I can make a dir here called Apache. Let me first check where I am. Alright, let's make a directory Apache. Let me go into the Apache directory, extract the contents from the commons jar. There we go, and I'm going to remove the manifest file. There we go. Now if I go out again and I create a jar lib, let's call it commons lang-new, and I'm going to say get the contents from the Apache directory, and if I copy this one over to my boot directory or bootlib, and I draw this up again, let's look for -m space, here we go. So let's quickly rather make this boot2, uber-boot2, and we go ahead and run this java-jar lib uber boot2.jar. We see that it worked. If you're very familiar with OneJar and you know the problem, feel free to drop a comment in the underneath the video so you can share your experience. So now this was a bit painful to go through this process, creating these things on the command line. Though I wanted to stick with the previous example just to run through with it. But going ahead in production, I would recommend that you use a build system such as Maven or Gradle. Now, if you're unfamiliar with those, I would be more than happy to create some videos walking you through it. So please drop your comments below. I hope you found this useful. Thanks for watching. Bye.